Additional lesson. The headline of the Craigslist ad read, "Student Help." The ad was brief, but to the point. It read, "Gentleman in town on business and would like to meet a female student over the age of 18. Very discreet. No escort, please." I was in my early 20s at the time, and my family was short of money. My father had been in poor health for many years and could not work. My mother was struggling to keep the family afloat. I attended a local college, as I couldn't afford to go out of town. I had an old beat-up car that was costing me more than it was worth. I had a part-time job plus babysitting, and still couldn't make ends meet. Times were tough. Although my family was struggling, we all hid it well. All my friends went to college, drove nice cars, and wore designer clothes. They had no idea about my family's hardships, and I never talked about it. I didn't even tell the guys I dated. They didn't ask me, but I did what I could to help as much as I could. I had heard of Craigslist and would occasionally browse the personal section. It amused me, as most of the ads were quite provocative, but it never occurred to me to respond to them. I was raised in a church with religious morals, and besides, I was too shy. I read the ads purely for entertainment purposes, and yet one morning I was looking at this ad on my computer. It caught my eye, and for some reason, I thought it was written for me. Maybe it was because the author called himself a gentleman, or maybe it was because he was looking for a student, not an escort. Maybe it was about my craving for adventure, or maybe it was because I was broke. Suddenly, it wasn't that hard to respond to a Craigslist ad. I had never done or even thought of doing anything like that before. That morning, I was too scared to respond to the ad, so I left and went to class. This Craigslist ad didn't get out of my head for the rest of the day. How bad could it be? It said he was from out of town, so no one would ever know. I'd already had casual sex with one of the fathers I worked for as a nanny, and he was paying me more than usual. In addition, 6 months earlier, I had had sex for money with an older man. I stumbled upon this adventure while waiting outside a movie complex after being dumped by my boyfriend, and a man unexpectedly proposed to me. I was mad at my boyfriend. I had no plans for the evening, so I accepted his proposal. It turned out to be very helpful. I wondered if I could do it again. The ad referred to a gentleman. I wondered what kind of money he was talking about. Am I worth a lot of money? I'm not a sexy prostitute, just an ordinary student. I wondered if... I decided that if the ad was still up when I got home from class, I would respond. It doesn't hurt to ask. I didn't commit to anything, did I? When I got home, the ad was still hanging. I cautiously responded to the ad, simply asking for more information. I mentioned that I was a 20-year-old college student who was going through a difficult time. A few minutes later, the response to my request came. Oh my God, my pulse quickened, because now I realized this was real. The man seemed very nice, and we exchanged numerous messages over the next day. The more we corresponded, the more comfortable I felt. He introduced himself as Jim, and I reluctantly told him my real name. Stupid of me. We exchanged pictures, and he seemed pleasant enough. I wouldn't say he was attractive, but on the other hand, he wasn't repulsive either. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. He also had a short beard. I had never dated a bearded guy before. Most of the guys I dated barely had a mustache. Jim said he'd be in town for a couple more days, and I agreed to meet him the next night in the hotel lobby for a drink. I made it clear that it was just a meeting, no promises or commitments, just a drink. He agreed and said he would be very respectful of my wishes. I was up all night. I was nervous and scared. What am I doing? Does this make me a prostitute? Imagine if my father found out. He would have been horrified. So much for religious education. What was I going to wear? It was Wednesday night, and I had spent a few hours preparing for my date. I told myself that it was a date to calm down and settle my nerves. I tried on a few outfits, but in the end I decided to forego the skirt and make do with tight jeans and a tight sweater. His ad asked for a college student, so I wasn't going to dress like a call girl and show a lot of skin. I dressed like a normal 20-year-old college student, like myself. The jeans were very tight and showed off my small ass, as well as the camel bone in the front. The sweater was also tight and showed off my braless breasts well, including the ossicles. I put on shoes with 3-inch heels to give my legs length. It was a casual outfit. For reference, I was 5'10", 105 pounds, and a bra size 34B. My hair was a natural light brown color, long and wavy. I arrived at the hotel and texted him from the car before I went in so he could meet me at the door. I was too timid to walk around the hotel lobby looking for him. As I got out of the car, I paused to contemplate my act. This was a new adventure for me, and the excitement of meeting a stranger and being able to have sex with him in his hotel room was very erotic. It occurred to me that we never even discussed money. I felt like if I asked about money, it would really make me a prostitute, so I never asked or mentioned it. The thought was too dirty, too disgusting. It also occurred to me that we hadn't discussed exactly what he expected of me. I should have set some sort of rules or boundaries. This was all new to me, and I was too timid to discuss sexual and financial details with a complete stranger. The lack of details made things less messy, and also gave me the opportunity to say no. Besides, I might not have been his type, and the night might have ended after drinks. "Hi, April. Nice to meet you," he said. Damn, I shouldn't have told him my real name. I don't think I'm very good at it. He pointed toward the hotel bar, and we made our way to a quiet spot in the back. We sat down at the bar and began small talk. Jim seemed like a nice man, but not what I expected. I guess I had preconceived notions of what a man who proposes to young women on Craigslist should be like. Physically, he wasn't much taller than me in heels, and was definitely overweight. He wasn't my type at all, but then again, I wasn't going to date him. He could easily pass for any of the men from church. There were no red flags, and he gave me no reason to run away. After a couple of drinks to calm my nerves, he asked if I wanted to go up to his room. There was a pause. Wow. The question somehow caught me off guard. I'm not sure exactly why, but it did. I took a deep breath and nodded timidly. In the elevator, he gently put his arm around my waist. It was the first time he'd ever really touched me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe I was really going for it. As we walked down the long hallway, all sorts of scenarios ran through my head. I prayed he wasn't a serial killer or some kind of deranged person. He stopped, opened the door, and I hesitantly stepped into his room. I heard the door slam shut and bolt behind me. There was no turning back now. I couldn't help but notice that the king bed was huge and took center stage in the room. The room was dimly lit, and quiet music was playing in the background. There was no doubt about what was now expected of me. I was a little surprised when he immediately hugged and kissed me. He clearly wasn't wasting any time. He ran his hands over my body. All sorts of thoughts were running through my head. What had I gotten myself into? I convinced myself that this was like dating. I kept telling myself that this was no different than any other man I'd dated. I knew what men wanted. Then he pulled away from our embrace, stepped back and said in a firm voice, "Undress for me." I realized from his tone that it wasn't a request, but an order. I froze in place for about 20 long seconds while I thought it over. There was silence as our eyes met. He didn't flinch, and I could tell by the look in his eyes that he was serious. For some reason, I expected things to go slower. I had a thought of running away, but then I calmed myself with a deep, long breath. I paused briefly and lifted first one foot, then the other, awkwardly unbuttoning and removing my heels. I paused and looked at Jim, crossing my arms as I stood topless in just my jeans. Neither of us said a word. He didn't say a word, but nodded his head, gesturing for me to continue. I bit my bottom lip and slowly unbuttoned the tight jeans. Slowly rocking my hips from side to side, I pulled my jeans down, releasing them as they fell to the floor. I paused again, standing tall with a high slit, and then quickly pulled them off. Jim kept his distance, and I quickly crossed my arms and squeezed my thighs together. I stood in front of him completely naked for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, he broke the silence. "Put your heels on," he pointed at them. I slipped my legs into them and bent over to buckle them, my breasts rippling freely as I bent over. Then he twirled his finger, indicating for me to turn around slowly so he could see. He was examining his acquisition. For the first time in my life, I felt like a piece of meat. Jim noted my youthful appearance and slender body. You could tell by the moisture on his finger that I was aroused. He began licking my nectar off his finger. I didn't say a word, trembling with anticipation. He took off his shirt and gently pushed me back onto the bed. Now I could see how overweight he was. A large roll of fat hung over his waistband. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling as he spread my legs. He didn't say a word, just leaned forward and buried his tongue in my moist pink folds. I closed my eyes and gave myself over to the moment. I tried to maintain some semblance of control, but it was useless. I was caught up in the sensations, and they carried me like the current of a strong river. Jim was older and overweight, but by golly, he was good. I'd never had a man with a beard descend on me before, and it was glorious. He was getting wilder and wilder. The sensation was amazing, and I arched my back, offering him more. He was rough, and I liked it too, his beard scratching me. He slid down my body and pounced on my pussy again. He growled loudly as he inserted a finger into me. That was it. I stepped over the edge, using both hands to pull him hard into me. Oh my God, that feels so good. I had barely recovered before Jim yanked me off the bed and knelt in front of me. I pulled myself together and jumped on top of him, fumbling for his belt buckle. Jim put both hands behind my head. I'm good at head work and love doing it, but he didn't give me a chance to slow down to show off my talent. I wish I could find a more polite way to express it, but there just isn't one. This is what was going on. It was one of the biggest stresses I've ever experienced. I was a complete mess. The makeup I had spent hours on was smudged. I grabbed the sheet and wiped my face as best I could as Jim collapsed onto the bed. I pulled down his pants and crawled up his body, settling on his stomach. Leaning over, I gave him a sloppy kiss. Given that he had aged and lost his shape, I was beginning to doubt if he could ever get solid again. Maybe that's all his body is capable of. Maybe it's time for me to leave. Even if he came to his senses, I doubted if he'd be able to satisfy me. Frankly, given that he was out of shape, I thought he wouldn't last more than 5 minutes. It wasn't long before he proved me wrong. No, just fast. But I was interrupted by his loud, stern voice. I said, "Now." Sensing his urgency and not wanting to make a scene, I ran my hands over his hairy chest and started riding him faster and harder. He ran his hands over my body. I liked it as much as he did. I put my arms back and leaned back in my chair. I leaned my head back. In that position, he could see. I was very flexible at the time, and I wanted to showcase that. When he finally pulled himself together, I slowly leaned back again until I was lying on his lap. I didn't move. I began to slowly slide back and forth on him. Suddenly, he sat up and lifted me off of him. I felt so empty and groaned in frustration. He quickly jumped off the bed and pulled me to the edge of the bed, spreading my legs wide. He was out of control, pushing himself up like a madman. It was wonderful. This guy was an animal. "Not inside." I pumped his shaft gently, circling it with my soft tongue. But after a couple minutes, he pulled out and made his way to the bathroom, closing the door behind him. I lay on the bed and thought about what had just happened. I was proud of myself for having the courage to follow through. Jim stood at the foot of the bed watching me and made a remark about me being such a nymphomaniac. I wanted more. Overall, he treated me well, and I enjoyed the evening. I understand how some women can fall into the habit of doing things like that. About a month later, I met Jim again. The psychological conclusion here may be that the protagonist of the story faced a series of difficult life circumstances that led her to make decisions that may not be in line with her inner beliefs and moral values. This story illustrates how external pressures, financial difficulties, desire for what one does not have, fear of social judgment, can influence an individual's choices, sometimes prompting actions that can have negative consequences for mental well-being and self-esteem. It is important to recognize that in situations where an individual feels that their choices are limited due to external circumstances, seeking support from professionals, such as psychologists or counselors, can help to find alternative and healthier ways of coping. It also raises issues of self-esteem, personal boundaries, and the importance of discussing sexual consent and safety. It is a reminder that it is important for everyone to strive for self-knowledge and understanding of their boundaries, and to have the courage to say no in situations that conflict with his or her personal beliefs or may cause harm. The importance of support from loved ones and professionals during difficult times in life cannot be overemphasized. Dear friends and viewers, I want to remind you that the full and uncensored version of this story is already available on our Patreon. There you will find even more details and depth to the story that we could not fully reveal here. This is a great opportunity to support us and get exclusive access to the material we create. with great attention to detail and quality. Join our community on Patreon to explore all facets of our story and dive into new depths of storytelling with us. Your support is incredibly important to us, and we are grateful to everyone who chooses to join and support our creativity along the way. We hope to see you at Patreon, translated with deeple.com, free version. I closed my eyes and gave myself over to the moment. I tried to maintain some semblance of control, but it was useless. I was caught up in the sensations, and they carried me like the current of a strong river. Jim was older and overweight, but by golly, he was good. I'd never had a man with a beard descend on me before, and it was glorious. He was getting wilder and wilder. The sensation was amazing, and I arched my back, offering him more. He was rough, and I liked it too, his beard scratching me. He slid down my body and pounced on my pussy again. He growled loudly as he inserted a finger into me. That was it. I stepped over the edge, using both hands to pull him hard into me. Oh my God, that feels so good. I had barely recovered before Jim yanked me off the bed and knelt in front of me. I pulled myself together and jumped on top of him, fumbling for his belt buckle. Jim put both hands behind my head. I'm good at head work and love doing it, but he didn't give me a chance to slow down to show off my talent. I wish I could find a more polite way to express it, but there just isn't one. This is what was going on. It was one of the biggest stresses I've ever experienced. I was a complete mess. The makeup I had spent hours on was smudged. I grabbed the sheet and wiped my face as best I could as Jim collapsed onto the bed. I pulled down his pants and crawled up his body, settling on his stomach. Leaning over, I gave him a sloppy kiss. Given that he had aged and lost his shape, I was beginning to doubt if he could ever get solid again. Maybe that's all his body is capable of. Maybe it's time for me to leave. Even if he came to his senses, I doubted if he'd be able to satisfy me. Frankly, given that he was out of shape, I thought he wouldn't last more than 5 minutes. It wasn't long before he proved me wrong. No, just fast. But I was interrupted by his loud, stern voice. I said, "Now." Sensing his urgency and not wanting to make a scene, I ran my hands over his hairy chest and started riding him faster and harder. He ran his hands over my body. I liked it as much as he did. I put my arms back and leaned back in my chair. I leaned my head back. In that position, he could see. I was very flexible at the time, and I wanted to showcase that. When he finally pulled himself together, I slowly leaned back again until I was lying on his lap. I didn't move. I began to slowly slide back and forth on him. Suddenly, he sat up and lifted me off of him. I felt so empty and groaned in frustration. He quickly jumped off the bed and pulled me to the edge of the bed, spreading my legs wide. He was out of control, pushing himself up like a madman. It was wonderful. This guy was an animal. "Not inside," I pumped his shaft gently, circling it with my soft tongue. But after a couple minutes, he pulled out and made his way to the bathroom, closing the door behind him. I lay on the bed and thought about what had just happened. I was proud of myself for having the courage to follow through. Jim stood at the foot of the bed watching me and made a remark about me being such a nymphomaniac. I wanted more. Overall, he treated me well, and I enjoyed the evening. I understand how some women can fall into the habit of doing things like that. About a month later, I met Jim again. My introduction to Jim on Craigslist was quite memorable. At the end of the day, Jim was nothing special, but he was kind and respectful to me, and that is always very important to me. About a month after that first meeting, I got a message from Jim. He said he was back in town and wanted to meet me the next night. He asked me to come early so we could spend more time together since I lived at home and couldn't stay overnight. The pleasant memories of our previous encounter prompted me to justify myself to my boyfriend, and less than 24 hours later, I was knocking on his hotel room door. Since it was late spring, I wore a short denim skirt. The top wasn't see-through, but it was flimsy and thin. It was typical of me. Jim answered and immediately hugged and kissed me as we stood at the entrance to the room. He complimented me on my outfit. He poured me a glass of white wine, and we moved to the sofa by the window. It was early evening, and the light came in through the open blinds. He didn't seem in such a hurry this time, which I appreciated. As we chatted, trying to catch up, his hand rested on my bare leg, gently stroking my thighs. The wine was sweet, and I drank it rather quickly, as it tasted more like a fruity drink. He quickly refilled my glass. The wine loosened me up. He said he missed me and had been thinking about me a lot over the last month. I smiled and said I had too, but I didn't tell him that I had been thinking about him for other reasons. It reminded me of the children's story about the little steam train that could do everything. He pulled out a camera and asked, "Do you mind if I take some pictures as a souvenir? I hate having my picture taken." I knew from previous boyfriends that pictures meant naked shots. "Come on, just a few. You look so adorable." He quickly moved away from the couch and started snapping before I could respond. He took a few shots of me on the couch and then asked me to stand up and slowly take them off. I playfully teased him. I felt like a guilty pleasure, and my slutty side was showing. Besides, I felt a little obligated, since he'd given me a generous gift the last time we'd met. "Yeah, I like your breasts," he replied with a wide grin, taking my hand and helping me stand up. "There's a light by the window." He gestured to the window. "Not the face?" I asked. Jim didn't respond to my request. I playfully started modeling for him, being photographed by a guy. It's great foreplay. "These are private photos, right? You're not going to show them to anyone, are you?" "Of course not. They are for my eyes only," he assured me. "Click, click, click," he continued. I tried to hide my face behind my hair or look away from the camera as much as I could, but I knew he wanted to see my face in his pictures. "Bend over, turn, on your heels," he snapped furiously. I whispered in his ear, "I'm fucking... Put the camera down." I put one arm around him. Oh, hell yeah. He tensed, pushing in hard. He smelled nice and was soft and plump to cuddle with. As we lay in bed and recovered, the hotel phone on the bedside table rang. James picked up the phone. "Hello. Yup. Okay. Bye." "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah. Are you okay?" He smiled back. "That'll happen once you're solid again." I laughed. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I looked at Jim and he said, "Your surprise is here." "Oh, I love surprises," I replied, wondering if it was room service. Jim got up and put on his hotel robe, heading for the door. I ran to the bathroom to wash up for dinner. I jumped in the shower and washed quickly, being careful not to get my hair and makeup wet. As I was wiping myself dry, I heard voices. I thought it was Jim turning on the TV. Wrapping the towel around me, I opened the door and went into the bedroom. What the hell? I wrapped my arms around my chest, pulling the towel tighter with embarrassment and shock. There was another man sitting on the couch with Jim. "What is... I couldn't form a sentence. "Relax. This is a colleague of mine." I told him about our arrangement, and he asked if you'd be interested in... extend the deal for him. I stood there half naked and wet with these two guys standing in front of me. I was being offered I don't know what. A prostitute. He stood up. "Look, I'm sorry, I thought James explained everything. I have $200 for you, but obviously if you're not interested," he mumbled. "Can I?" Between the two of them, that would be, a lot of money. Hell, it was tempting. It was something like 2 months of part-time work. Still a little embarrassed and humiliated, I couldn't find the words. "What? You want to join us?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized that it sounded more like a suggestion than an incomprehensible question. I was just trying to make sense of the situation, as I had no idea what they were thinking. He looked at Jim. "I don't mind threesomes," Jim said. The other guy smiled. "If you're okay with it," he said to me, "I'm okay with it." I was still in shock, looking at the smiling Jim. I didn't know what to say or do. Remember, I was very timid back then and always avoided confrontation. Catching my hesitation, he said, "I'll give you $300. Okay. I shrugged, thinking, did I really just make a great deal? "Paul," he said, unbuttoning his shirt. Jim must have read my thoughts. He handed me another glass of wine and put his arm around my shoulders. I don't think I've ever drunk wine so fast. Jim squeezed me tightly in his arms, making me feel safe and secure. Then he spun me around and hugged me from behind. As he hugged me, he started nibbling on my neck. I let my head drop to his shoulders. I felt the towel loosen and start to slide off. Paul stood in front of me, and watched as Jim slowly pulled the towel off of me, letting it fall to the floor. He showed me to his friend Paul. "No shit," Paul muttered approvingly. I reached behind him and slipped my hand under Jim's robe while Paul watched me stroke him. Staring at him, I licked my lips, and he realized what it was all about. "She's good," he said, looking at Jim. Their looks were in agreement. While Paul pawed at me and watched, Jim went on. Paul was happy to let Jim's thrusts do all the work. He was thrusting in as hard as he could. I could feel his hands on my thighs. I was covered in sweat. "Yes, more, yes, more, yes, more, yes, more." I was on edge. His breath was hot and heavy on my neck as he leaned against me, exhausted. I kissed and cuddled with Paul and Jim as we lay in bed, completely exhausted. After about 15 minutes, both men started touching me. I felt it would be wise for me to leave before they tensed up and started again. Remember, I suspected that Jim was taking Viagra, so he could probably make it through the night. I got to my feet, but my legs could barely hold me up. Paul jumped up to help me. The wine had turned my legs to rubber. I could feel the juice draining out of me as I headed for the shower. Paul adjusted the water temperature and then stepped into the shower with me. He hugged me from behind as we both soaped and scrubbed our bodies. The warm water felt wonderful as it cascaded over me. As I walked through the hotel lobby, I felt ashamed of myself. I could not believe what had just happened. I was overcome with guilt, no doubt brought on by my religious upbringing. I acted and felt bad, very bad. I was even treated like a night butterfly. What was wrong with me? I told myself never again. It wasn't me. Dear viewers, the story we have just told is a complex weave of choices, relationships, and personal boundaries. At the center of this story is a personal experience that makes us reflect on the importance of respect, self-esteem, and the importance of saying no when necessary. This story reminds us that every choice has consequences, and the importance of accepting those consequences while maintaining respect for ourselves and our boundaries. I'd also like to remind you that an uncensored version of this story is already available on our Patreon. This is not only a way to dive deeper into the narrative, but also an opportunity to support our channel by allowing us to create content that speaks to difficult and important topics. Remember that each of us faces moments of choice, and sometimes those moments can determine our future. Be yourself, respect yourself and your boundaries, and don't be afraid to say no when necessary. Your support makes our work possible, and we are grateful for everyone who joins us on this journey at Patreon. Thank you for your attention, and see you for more stories.